Okay, let's just unpack this. When you think of the Alamo, what comes to mind? A shrine, a battlefield,
Yeah.
the cradle of Texas liberty. It's probably the most famous historic site in the American West.
Absolutely.
But what if I told you that for 21 years, the most important building on that site, the Long Barrack, where most of the fighting actually happened, was a wholesale grocery warehouse?
Yeah, it's pretty stunning. It wasn't a museum. It wasn't preserved. It was a full-on commercial operation. We're talking like an industrial supply hub.
Yeah.
Think of it as the 19th century version of a massive Costco distribution center.
Run by a company called Hugo-Schmeltzer and just filled with sacks of flour, barrels of molasses, crated cigars.
All of it.
So our mission in this deep dive is to give you a shortcut to understanding this bizarre, forgotten chapter. We're going to dig into the German immigrant merchants who built an empire literally on top of sacred ground. And we'll frame their ownership around three really transformative years in American history: 1883, 1898, and 1904. We really want to know how the place where Davy Crockett died became a place selling dry goods and whiskey.
And that leads to the bigger question, the one we're really trying to answer here. If these men were such masters of commerce, true logistics experts, why did they do what they did at the end? When they had the chance to cash out for maximum profit, why did they choose to sell the Alamo property to preservationists instead?
It was a decision that was, commercially backward, but historically essential.
Exactly. So to get that, you have to understand the business first.
Yeah.
You have to meet the men.
Let's do it. Who are the founders of Hugo-Schmeltzer?
Okay, so the partners really embody that successful German immigrant merchant class that was just transforming San Antonio back then. There were three main guys. First, you had Gustav Heinrich Schmeltzer. He was the seasoned, meticulous one, the real businessman, who in the end kind of becomes the moral compass of the story.
Okay. And then William Hoyerman.
William Hoyerman, yeah. He was the experienced merchant, the numbers guy. He was the treasurer, managed the books.
And the third.
And the third was Charles Hermann Gunther von Hugo. He was the visionary, the most ambitious, the most aggressive entrepreneur of the three. Just Hugo is fine. So Hugo and Schmeltzer, they start their wholesale grocery firm in 1871. But let's pause on that title for a second. Wholesale grocers?
Right, because they weren't just a corner store.
Not even close. They were the critical link in the entire supply chain. Our sources call them logistics masters, and that's exactly what they were. You have to picture their original location before the Alamo. It was just a constant traffic jam of ox-drawn carts, heavy freight wagons rolling in and out.
They were supplying the suppliers, buying goods in huge volumes: flour, sugar, coffee, but also luxuries: wines, spirits, cigars. And they were the go-to for every major retailer, every saloon, and big places like the famous Menger Hotel all across South Texas. They were the region's commercial lifeblood.
And that thriving operation is chugging along until 1883, when disaster strikes. And this is a catalyst that sends them unexpectedly to the Alamo. A devastating fire. It happens at their original store on Commerce in Navarro. The story goes that two young employees were in the basement, transferring alcohol near an open flame. Yeah, you can guess what happened next. An inferno. The fire just destroyed everything. The inventory, the building itself, gone.
So they were, commercially speaking, homeless.
Completely. And that setback led them directly across town to Alamo Plaza. They bought the Long Barrack property in 1883 from a Frenchman named Honoré Grenet.
And Grenet had already turned it into this weird tourist trap.
A very odd one. It was part museum, part store.
Wow.
He'd added this ornate porch and these bizarre castle-like towers that had absolutely nothing to do with the mission's history. But the merchants, they saw past all that. They saw the location, the size. It was a perfect ready-made warehouse right on the central plaza.
And just like that, the site where heroes of the Texas Revolution fell becomes the new home of the Hugo-Schmeltzer wholesale firm. The Long Barrack is now filled with high-grade coffee sacks piled high, barrels of molasses, crates of goods. It's just an unbelievable contrast.
It is. And that transition perfectly captures this moment America was in, specifically in 1883. It was a collision between the romanticized frontier and raw industrial modernity.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, connecting their story to the bigger forces at play. For their logistics empire to grow, they needed standardization. And in 1883, that is exactly what America gets. Nationwide standard time zone.
That's a huge point. I mean, before 1883, it was chaos. Every town had its own local time. The railroads demanded standardization to coordinate schedules. And logistics firms like Hugo-Schmeltzer, they benefited massively. You just can't run an efficient supply chain without time zones.
And the symbolism of that year is just, it's immense. You get the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge, this marvel of engineering pointing to this urban industrial future.
And at the same time, you have the debut of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, which is already creating the myth of a disappearing frontier, the very thing that modern commerce was replacing.
Wow. Even in Texas, you could feel it. You had the first major labor strike, 300 cowboys in the panhandle demanding higher wages, rejecting corporate ranching. The era of the individual cowboy was ending, and the era of the corporate middleman, like these German merchants, was on the rise.
But they didn't just stop with groceries. Charles Hugo, in particular, saw a bigger opportunity with the location's sacred name.
The bank.
He absolutely capitalized on it. In 1890, Charles Hugo co-founds the Alamo National Bank, and he serves as its first president for 15 years. He consciously took the most sacred symbol of Texas liberty and turned it into a brand for financial stability and power.
Wait, I have to stop you there. So there was no public outcry. He's running a loud, smelly wholesale operation inside the barracks, and then he puts a bank named Alamo right next to the shrine.
Well, what's fascinating is how he normalized it. San Antonio was booming, right? And Hugo was seen as a major driver of that economic growth. So he had the grocery store inside the long barrack, and he ran the bank physically touching the chapel walls. He had effectively cornered commerce and finance, all using Texas history as his brand.
That is truly audacious. Okay, let's jump ahead 15 years. The next key date, 1898. The grocery warehouse is humming along, and then Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt shows up.
Right. Mid-May 1898, Roosevelt comes to San Antonio to assemble the first U.S. volunteer cavalry, the famous Rough Riders. He checks into the Menger Hotel, which is magnificent, just 100 yards from the Alamo. Legend says he recruited some of his guys right there in the Menger bar.
So you have to imagine the scene. You have 1,200 future heroes of the Spanish-American War training at Camp Riverside. Roosevelt is planning from the Menger. And all this is happening in the shadow of the Long Barrack.
And inside the long barrack, Hugo and Schmeltzer are completely unfazed. It's business as usual. They're checking manifests, offloading coffee, stacking whiskey barrels. I mean, Roosevelt is preparing men to fight for Cuban independence, a new fight for freedom. And it's happening steps away from the site of Texan independence, which is currently being used to store canned tomatoes. It's just wild.
And the sources show how commercialized it was. Photos from that era show the Hugo-Schmeltzer building just dominating the plaza, not with historical markers, but with huge commercial ads.
Yes, specifically large painted signs promoting travel. They were advertising things like the St. Louis World's 1904 fair right on the walls of the Long Barrack. They saw their prime location as basically the biggest billboard in South Texas.
It just shows how focused they were on the business of the present. But that moment was about to shift. Roosevelt and the Rough Riders leave on May 29, 1898. 6 years later, he's the president. And in that very same year, 1904, the grocery warehouse is finally sold.
Which brings us to 1904, the fateful decision. So by 1903, the company's been in the old mission walls for 2 decades. The building is ancient. The land under it is maybe the most valuable piece of real estate in San Antonio.
The temptation to just cash out must have been huge. And the opportunity was there.
Oh, it's huge. An Eastern syndicate, a big investment group, comes to them with an extremely lucrative offer. Sell us the Long Barrack, we'll demolish it, and we'll build a massive upscale hotel. Commercially, this was the no-brainer, the path to maximum return.
So why didn't they take it? This is the pivot, the moral pivot that saves the Alamo.
It all comes down to a verbal promise. Schmeltzer remembered something he told a woman named Adina de Zavala years earlier.
And she was with the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, the DRT, the main preservation group?
Exactly. And Schmeltzer had, without a formal contract, just on his word, promised her that if they ever decided to sell, he'd give the preservationists the first chance to buy it.
He chose his word over the money. He offered the DRT a preemptive bid of $75,000, and we should put that number in context for you.
Right. In 1904, $75,000 is a fortune. It's roughly $2.6 million today. And you have to remember, the average worker was making maybe $400 a year. This was a monumental ask for a preservation group.
And de Zavala and the DRT were struggling. They couldn't raise the money fast enough. It looked like the deal might fall through and the hotel syndicate would move in.
But that's when a wealthy Texas heiress named Clara Driscoll steps in. She was able to advance most of the money, And that saved the sale. It prevented the Long Barrack from being leveled.
And think about the year, 1904. Teddy Roosevelt wins the presidency in a landslide. And yet, these women are in this desperate struggle to save the past.
Hmm. And Schmeltzer, this brilliant businessman, he makes what was commercially the wrong decision. He kept his verbal promise instead of chasing the big payout. And because of that one choice, the Alamo's salvation became possible.
So what happened to the company? Did giving up that prime real estate hurt them?
Not at all. They were smart. They strategically reinvested that $75,000. The whole grocery industry was consolidating, so in 1907, they built a massive, modern, 29,000 square foot warehouse on East Houston Street. They were just adapting to the market.
A classic business pivot. And they sold the whole company in 1910, just a year before Schmeltzer died at 83. A successful exit.
But the real drama, and you're not going to believe this, started after the grocers left. Just when you think the story's over, the preservationists start fighting with each other.
This is the legendary Second Battle of the Alamo.
It is. Clara Driscoll, who put up the money, had a huge feud with Adina de Zavala.
Over what to do with the building.
Exactly. Driscoll wanted to demolish the Long Barrack, the old grocery store, and turn the space into a nice memorial park. She thought the building was too modified, that it wasn't the real thing.
But de Zavala insisted that the original monastery walls were still inside.
She was passionate about it, and, history proved her absolutely correct. But she had to do something drastic.
So what did she do?
She barricaded herself inside. In 1908, Adina de Zavala, at 46 years old, locked herself inside the Long Barrack for 3 days to stop the demolition crews.
A physical siege. She was inside, cut off.
Completely cut off. She had supporters lowering food and water to her by rope through the windows. The story went national. The New York Times called it the second siege of the Alamo.
Wow.
And her actions worked. It halted the demolition long enough for the state to intervene. I mean, the irony is just staggering. The grocers saved the building from commercial greed, only for it to be nearly destroyed by the very people who bought it.
So what's the ultimate legacy here? We've got two buildings that tell their story.
We do. The first, the Long Barrack, the old warehouse. It went through turmoil, but it eventually became the Long Barrack Museum, a core part of the shrine, saved by a merchant's promise.
And the second building, their modern 1907 warehouse.
That had a long second life. It was a boot factory, then a popular restaurant, the Spaghetti Warehouse, and today it's being restored. It's going to be reopened as the Hugo, named in honor of its original owner.
So that's really the core discovery here. Hugo-Schmeltzer and Hoermann. They weren't heroes. They were shrewd, practical men of commerce. They built their empire on sacred ground. They profited from it. But when it came down to it, Schmeltzer chose his word over the money, and that choice made everything else possible.
It really changes the whole story. To think that for years, Charles Hugo was running a bank named after the Alamo while stacking flour and cigars inside the very walls where Crockett died. For 2 decades, his business and that shrine were totally inseparable.
That's incredible.
The Alamo rightly remembers the soldiers who fell there in 1836. But maybe we should also remember the man who owned it, who built his fortune inside it, and then strategically let it go. He ensured that the survival of history would outweigh the pursuit of his own commerce. It's just a powerful lesson in how the integrity of a simple handshake can end up shaping a nation's legacy.